Hello, my name is Erin Long, and I'm currently the LGBTQ Graduate Center Resource Center Graduate Assistant here at Office of Multicultural Services and Programs. Today, we are having a discussion about Jurassic Park and queer theory by William Edwards. So he is actually going to be using my computer. So I'm going to shut my computer or my video off and have him get settled in, and he will be here in a second. So thank you, and hang on. So you're the president spectrum and all this stuff.
Hello. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, thank you. All right. Well, my name is William Edwards, and I'm the president of Spectrum here on campus. And I'm very glad that you guys are all here tonight. Give me just a second to start screen sharing here.
I'll help you.
Thanks, friend. There we go.
Can everyone see that okay? Okay. And then
Cool.
I would talk a little bit. I would talk a little bit louder, Will.
Here, I'm gonna do this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just go ahead and do this.
Okay. And then I will have it like this so you can see it better.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, there you go.
All right. Can you all still hear me okay? I'm sorry. All right. Let me go ahead and do this. There we go. All right. Thank you all again for being here tonight. I'm going to go ahead and just jump right into this. Let's see. So as I said, I'm the president here on campus for the LGBT group. And tonight we're going to be talking about Jurassic Park as a framework for essentially queerness. So first off, it's my view that dinosaurs are queer creatures. And by that, I mean that dinosaurs kind of exist in this space where they are kind of a fantasy for us because they are sort of fantasy creatures to an extent. And I say that to mean that they have a fantasy about them, right? But we still know that they were actually here on the earth. And so they are positioned in a way that allows us to appreciate them with a sort of fantasy lens, but we still know that they were actually on the earth. And so there's partial fantasy to them as well as concreteness to them. But I think that their position as, you know, maybe a fantasy creature sort of queers how we understand them, especially if you watch something like Jurassic Park, right? So obviously Jurassic Park is about, pardon me, it's obviously a movie about these creatures, right? But there's a lot more here. And that's to say that Jurassic Park, both as a book and as a show, are not really about the dinosaurs at all. And that is to say, and that is to mean that this story is actually about capitalism and whether or not we should do something just because we can, right? So when we read Jurassic Park and when we watch the film, it would seem that it's a dinosaur film, and that's just the bottom line, right? But when you scratch the surface, you start to see that there's actually a lot more here. And so that was one of the purposes as to why I thought this would be so fun and why I thought it was so cool. Let's see. There we go. So these are some of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight. These may or may not make sense without the context that we will put them in, but I just wanted to put that here first. All right. So frog DNA and sex changes. I know that sounds a bit odd, but bear with me here. So you can read what I have on the screen, but I'm basically just going to talk about what I have on the screen and then talk about some more, and then we can talk about it. So essentially, the dinosaurs in the park are brought back from their DNA. And all of the dinosaurs in the park are genetically female, so that they don't breed when they're not supposed to. So within this story that is the park, right, they are created that way. Obviously, if you've seen the film or if you've read the book, you know that the dinosaurs obviously find a way to do this and they begin to breed, and that obviously presents problems in the park, right? So I wanted to sort of put a queer lens on what this is like. Essentially, the way that this happens is that when the genes for the creatures are, sorry, that doesn't make sense. When the genes are found, their DNA has to be filled in. So what happens within the science of the story, and not so much like actual science as we know it, the DNA of frogs are used to fill in the gaps for the genetic sequence of the creatures in the park. Sorry. And the reason that this matters is that there are certain, I think they're West African frogs who can change their sex when in a single sex space. So because all of the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park are girls, part of them spontaneously change their sex. And that to me just sort of had queerness written all over it. And as far as discussing what this is like in praxis, that to me said something about the way that non-binary people or trans people, quote, change their sex, right, to survive in a particular space. So if we're talking again about the science of the story here, the dinosaurs are not supposed to be able to procreate, and that's why they are all girls, right? And then obviously this doesn't work, right? But it's not so much the gendered portion of it as much as it is that these creatures modify their bodies to survive in a certain space. And to me, that is what trans people and non-binary people do as well. So there's this sense that you are changing something about yourself. I mean, of course, that's something that's been true about you, right? But in a loose framework here, these creatures are changing something about who they are because of the space that they're in, and it requires them to do this change so that they can thrive, right? So that was sort of my first thought as far as this goes. And again, that's just to say that these creatures change something about who they are so that they can thrive in the captivity that they're in, right? and in my view, in a very broad-stroked queer way. I think that that is something that we can understand that we sometimes have to do in order to be our true selves, in order to thrive the way that we should. All right, villains, heroes, and prisoners. So the dinosaurs are arguably the bad guys in the film, right? So let's see. Sorry, I had to find something on my screen. So they are sort of the bad guys, right? So we understand that the dinosaurs are, chasing the people, right? So that sort of puts them in a space where they're the bad guys, right? But it should also be understood that, let's see, that since all of the dinosaurs in the park are girls, or what we would call girls, it also provides an interesting spin for the fact that most of the time we don't see strong female characters who are also the bad guy, in a piece of work, right? And so that is one way that you can sort of queer what's happening here. But the other thing is that they can also be understood as heroes as well. Because if you understand that these dinosaurs are, essentially held captive against their will in a timeline that they don't know, they have to sort of outsmart that system, right? And for me, this shows the way that we live in systems that don't really support us, right? So let me sort of break that down for you all. So the dinosaurs are seen as the bad guys, but when you understand that it's not really their fault that they were, brought back to life, they are learning to survive in a system that's not built for them, in a timeline that they're not really supposed to be in a natural space, right? So as far as like the timeline goes, dinosaurs were not meant to exist at the same time that we do, right? So they are, taken from their natural place in time and ripped forward in time to serve basically a capitalistic purpose. And that says a lot to me about the way that we sort of don't let queer people live in their own spaces. And again, this is sort of a loose framework because, there's nothing not natural about being gay or queer or trans or, all of those things, right? But there's something to be said for what is most natural for me as a queer person, and then being told by the system that I'm in that I'm not allowed to do that or not allowed to have that. And then I have to learn how to survive inside of the system that tells me that I have to act a certain way or be a certain way, or, love somebody that I may or may not love just because I'm gay, right? So the way that these dinosaurs have to survive in a system that is not necessarily built for them, I think says a lot about the lived experiences of queer people if we were to use the dinosaurs as a symbol for our queerness. Iconic characters. So we're going to step back away from the dinosaurs and talk about the other characters here. So Dr. Sattler and Lex are the strong female characters that we see in the film and the book. Lex, the teenage girl from the film, in the book is actually only about 6 years old, so they flipped that around. But whenever you look at the work that's already out there about Jurassic Park being a queer film, is Dr. Sattler, who's up here she's my top right corner, but she might be flipped for you guys. So a lot of the gender studies work that goes into Jurassic Park really has to do with her not taking any shit from people, right? She does her own thing. She is a very strong, uh, strong character in that sense. So she's obviously, one to note here. And then let's see, Dr. Malcolm as well in the bottom corner. One of the other things that you'll constantly see if you were to type into Google like Jurassic Park and gender studies would be the way that his character kind of serves in the film as like a sex code. So he's the flirt. He's, shown here with his bare chest in the very famous, pardon me, very famous scene there as well. And it just sort of goes to show that whether it was on purpose or not, gender is really played with in the film, and it's definitely played with in the book as well. The female characters in the book are meant to be strong, and that's again not really something that we often see. And then of course Jeff Goldblum's character here is really used as like the sexy for the film, and it's not often that we see that flipped for a male character either. And then Muldoon's killing here. I hope that you've all seen the film, because if you haven't, this might not make sense to you. But in the film, Muldoon is the park ranger who's killed by the velociraptor in the jungle. And this just goes to show that if we understand the dinosaurs as characters rather than like creatures, like if we were to give them the kind of treatment as a character that we would the people, we would essentially see that one of the complexities to this is that again, we don't see a lot of strong female characters in film. And if we are to understand the dinosaurs as technically strong female characters, then what we have is the murder of a side male character by a strong female character. And if we are reading the dinosaurs as characters in the same way that we would the people, that's just something else to note as far as how the dinosaurs act in the park, right? And then Dr. Hammond sort of plays this white male archetype. In the films, he's seen as a very kind person. In the book, he is not so much. In the book, it's not shied away from that he is in this for the capital. He knows that this park is going to make him lots and lots of dough, and he doesn't care who he hurts in the process. And they don't touch on that in the film the same way. So in some ways, he definitely fulfills this. He's quite old. He's old and kind and that kind of thing. But he's also kind of a bad dude if you really think about it. So his character is also not as straightforward as we might think. And then the character of Tim, I'm going to jump back for just a second. Like I said, in the film, Lex is about 16 and Tim is maybe about like 10. In the book, though, Tim is the older character and Lex is the child as far as the book goes. But in the book and the film, they make a note to say that Tim does not get along well with his dad and he doesn't play sports. And if that is not like code for gay in the modern world, I don't know what is. So that spoke to me even as a child, like that Tim was more interested in the books and not the sports. That was definitely me as a kid. And I just think that there's not a lot of study out there for Tim as a character. The kids in the book and the film are important for sure, but they don't do a lot to drive the plot as far as their characters go. Um, and there's only a little bit about Tim that we get from the film and the book. And it is basically that he's, into the books and not the sports. And in Jurassic Park, the book, more so than the film, um, it very clearly says that he doesn't get along with his dad and that his sister does because she plays sports and he doesn't. And that to me is, obviously there are gay people that play sports and that's fine. But as far as the way that we code a certain character, um, it says a lot to me about my own personal childhood being the same way and growing up and, realizing that I was gay. But I think it also says something about the fact that you wouldn't add a detail in about a character, maybe, if you weren't supposed to sort of read into it. So this idea that he doesn't get along with his dad and he doesn't play sports says to me that Tim very obviously grows up to be a gay man obsessed with Jurassic Park. So that's just always been like a fun thing for me. Characters and race and class. So this is not touched so much in the film, but in the book, so again, I didn't mean, or I don't know if this was meant to be as apparent as it was, but in the book, in the first book, and in the second, but we're mostly talking about the first book here. Sorry, in the book, the workers on Jurassic Park are the people that live on the island of Costa Rica. And within the book, it's made obvious that the laborers of the park are Black and brown people. And nothing else about race for any of the characters is spoken to in the book. So that to me stood out as a way to show that most of the time people doing the work are people of color. And I think that says something about class, right? How we understand classism and race to mean that the people at the bottom of the chain here are Black and brown people who are in the park. I think one of the scenes in the book is that when everybody is getting into the Jeeps before they go on their trail, the people that open the doors for them are laborers in the park, right? They're just like paid staff. But in the book, Crichton makes a point to say that these people are like Black. And he doesn't point out the race of any of the other characters in such a specific way. And so, I mean, again, I don't know that that was on purpose, but it personally spoke to me about the relationship that laboring class has to, the color of your skin because of classism and racism, right? Plain and simple. So that's my little breakdown of all of the people in the story and not so much the creatures. And just some things to note about female characters in the story there. And of course, Jeff Goldblum without a shirt on is never a bad thing. So these characters, I think, speak a lot to the fact that you would watch the film and not necessarily think about it. And then you go back and you say like, oh, like these tropes, well, these things are not falling into tropes that we typically see in film. All right, so let's see. InGen is the company in the story who is responsible for the science that gets the park the DNA for creating the dinosaurs, right? And Hammond believes that the park will be a place of joy for kids. So especially in the film and somewhat in the book. So like I said, in the book, he's much more of a bad dude. And we like are told that he's a bad dude. Whereas in the film, he's like grandfather, right? So he's meant to be kind and sweet, and he just has this dream that there will be this park, and he's blind to all of the problems that are a part of why you should never open a park like Jurassic Park. But it is touched on in the book as well as in the film that he wants this to be a place of joy. And that to me says, still, if we're gonna apply a queerness to this story, that if we were to allow children to experiment um, with who they are, there's a lot of joy in being able to find out, you know, am I a boy? Am I a girl? Am I this, right? Instead of the idea that before, babies are even here, like we assign them a sex at birth. So they're not really given, or, most of the time, right? Uh, Young people don't have a place to just play with their gender and who they are and who they love and all these things that we learn about ourselves kind of after the fact, right? And so, this grumpy old man who doesn't really care about the well-being of the people in the park as long as it, gets him a quick buck. He's still underneath that wants this to be a place of joy, and the idea for the park in the idea for the park within the story starts off as something that's a good thing, right? And I think that says a lot about, just like I said here, like if kids were given the opportunity to play with that rather than say, you are a boy, you are a girl, and like sort of, what's the word I'm thinking of? Categorizing ourselves so staunchly before we've even been before we have the chance to say that maybe what we feel is not what we're being told that we are, right? So the idea for the park starts off as a really good thing, and of course becomes something else. And I think that we do that a lot to queer kids growing up, when we're told that we can't wear certain clothes or we can't play with certain toys. We could, in fact, have a space for joy to use all of those things. But then, the culture that we're in tells us that that's not okay, right? And then if we want to slightly jump over to the second book and the second film, one of the major things that's talked about is that what's called site, I think it's called Site B in the book and in the film, is that there are there's no fences on the second island because it's not a park. So if you've seen the second film or read the second book, there's a second place where the dinosaurs are. And of course, nobody in the first film knows this until later on. But the really big thing about Site B is that there's no fences. And if we're sort of following my first point about the park being a place of joy, the fences sort of act like pardon me. Let's see. The second island is intentionally curated without fences, which is basically like the gender binary. So what would our lives be like if we didn't have a fence? If we didn't have a system telling us that we have to dress a certain way, or we have to love a certain way, or the same way that we assign sex at birth, that's basically a fence. It blocks us off to our own truth, right? So there's a sorry, I lost my train of thought. These dinosaurs are more free the second time around, right? And that's supposed to be a good thing. So Site B is supposed to be after the fall of Jurassic Park, after everything goes wrong, there's still a place for them to exist over here without all the bad stuff that happened the first time around, right? And I really wish that we could do that with our sense of who we know ourselves to be, if we could exist in a place without, a system telling us how to dress or who to love or all those things that we are told that we can and cannot do because of being queer or being gay or being trans. So that was just a little sidebar about something else that is present in the story. So chaos and gender. This is sort of the meat and bones of where I saw this going. So chaos theory, you can read, I'll let you guys just read those there. The short version of chaos theory is that it is a framework in which to understand randomness. And let's see, within chaos theory, the feedback loops and interconnectedness are a big thing. And what I would like to do here is talk about the way that chaos theory looks a lot like what we know in gender theory. So gender performativity is the idea that gender is more in, let's see, sorry, I'm just going to read this off the screen because it's easier than tripping myself up. Performity means that there can be no gender identity before the gendered acts because the acts are continuously constituting the identity. So the continuousness of that looks a lot like a feedback loop that we see in the chaos theory. And I'm not a math person, so I'm not going to go into like what that actually is, but essentially it's a way to understand something that seems to be not predictable. So this is played with a lot in the book and in the film too, but the film obviously doesn't have a lot of time to go into it the way that the book does. So obviously opening up a park with like the park in the story is not a good idea, right? So chaos is sort of played with there as well. So chaos theory is a framework with which to understand things that are not predictable. And I think gender sort of acts the same way. Gender is a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? And there's a non-specified reality to what happens when we talk gender studies and we sort of pull these things apart and say, what does it mean to be, a boy or a girl? Or conversations about gender studies are very much about deconstructing what we have been taught is true. And there's a lot of chaotic detail there. So I think this idea that gender studies sort of does to gender what chaos theory does to the rest of the world is an interesting thing to play with. And to show that, I went ahead and sort of blurped these in here. So the picture at the bottom of this slide is Judith, her name's Judith Butler, and she came up with the theory of gender performativity. So that's why her photo is here. And so what I've done here is to sort of break down what I just tried to say on the last slide. So I copy and pasted the definition for chaos theory, and then I blurped in what that means in terms of gender studies. So chaos theory is an interdisciplinary theory stating that within apparent randomness, and that is the possibility of everything that is gender studies, right? So I'll give you guys a second to read that. And then let's see. Sorry, because I'm not on my own computer, things are difficult to find. Let's see. So chaos theory has a lot to do with, again, what seems to be things that were understood as not being able to be made sense of. And then chaos theory started in about the 20th century, and so computers were finally able to process stuff that looked like it couldn't uh, be um, be like sorry, stuff that couldn't be sort of understood. Like you couldn't put it into a formula because there's a lot about the natural world that doesn't necessarily fit into a formula. So all of a sudden, there was a formula for stuff that you couldn't normally put into a formula. And that to me says a lot about the fact that gender is often more complicated than we give it credit for. So that's sort of how chaos looks a lot like gender, or at least how we might be able to understand gender as a reality through the context of chaos theory, if that makes sense. All right, so Judith Butler and the T-Rex. This is going to be a little bit far out, but we're going to go with it. So Judith Butler comes up with this new way to understand gender theory, and it really, again, I'm just going to let you guys read that, and I'm just going to talk over it because most of what I say is like already in the text. So Butler comes along and produces this new idea for how to understand gender and sex. And it really blows the top off of what we had previously thought. And so she points out all of these ways to sort of branch off from what we already thought gender studies was. So Butler argues that gender is a construction of performativity. And basically, my thought process here was that Judith Butler does to gender what the T-Rex does to the park. So the T-Rex sort of proves that everything that's supposed to be true about why the park is safe is not safe. The T-Rex gets out of its cage, and everybody knows that the whole point of the film is that the dinosaurs don't stay where they're supposed to stay, right? And Butler really does this as far as gender studies goes. In 1990, she published her book Gender Trouble, that part of this is from. And like I said, it blew the top off of everything that we just believe to be true about the collegiate approach to the academic framework of gender, or the idea that gender studies was an academic framework to begin with. All of the stuff that was believed to be true in that space at the time, she says, no, it's not like that at all. And so she goes into this space and complicates it and challenges us to think about the ways that we think about gender. So not just thinking about gender, but challenging us to think about our thought process in thinking about something that gender is, and what gender was from an academic standpoint at the time that she published her book. And I think the T-Rex does that to the park in the way that the T-Rex, like I said, the dinosaurs don't stay where they're supposed to stay, right? So they complicate this entire story, right? Like there's just supposed to be creatures in a park, and it's supposed to work out, and it's supposed to be fine, right? And, from the jump, we see that that's not what happens. That's not what this story's about, right? So the T-Rex sort of stands out, of course, in the film, like that's, the big catch, right? As all of the reasons that our previous thinking for the way that this park is supposed to work does not work, right? So I would say that Judith Butler is to gender studies as the T-Rex is to Jurassic Park. Um, and I get that that's kind of a far out framework, but it was just sort of a fun thing as far as, um, at the time that her book was published, it complicated everything that we took for granted um, about the academics of gender studies. And like I said, the T-Rex basically does this to the park. Um, he comes in and breaks everything that we believe to be true about how the park is supposed to work. And the T-Rex shows the danger of having a park like this. And of course, what Butler does to gender isn't dangerous, but it is uh, liberating in the way that the T-Rex sort of frees himself from the cage, right? So you can play with that, or at least I was playing with it and sort of liked the whole thing. Let's see. All right, Indominus Rex and the future of gender. Um, so theorists for a long time have challenged the way that we look at how we look and treat gender studies and queer culture. So to this effect, what does the future of that feel like? Essentially, so let's see. So this particular Rex is from the Jurassic World franchise, which does not have a book attached to it. But essentially what they've done in the film, because as I said, the other, let's see, so Jurassic Park and then Jurassic Park The Lost World both have books attached to them. Jurassic Park 3 and then the other two Jurassic World films after do not. So in Jurassic World and Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, this particular Rex is made by bunching a whole bunch of different previous creatures together. So I think they talk about the T-Rex, the Velociraptor, the Stegosaurus, and one other one as well, all being combined like in a lab the same way that the creatures from the first film were made to produce this particular creature here. And I use that as a framework for what would the future of gender be if we were to take all of the best parts of it and allow that to propel us into the future, right? Jurassic Park does this with this particular creature that you see on the screen here. He's part T-Rex, Stegosaurus, and all those others that I just said. So they've essentially taken the praxis of Jurassic Park a step further and said, okay, we brought these things back to life, but now what would happen if we were to create one on our own that didn't necessarily exist before, but had all of the really cool parts of the ones that we know are here, right? And I would really like to do that with the way that we think about gender and sex and queerness. What does the future of gender as an entire, lived space, what does that look like and feel like if we are to take all of the best parts of it, all of the things that we know work about it, and say, where is the future of the queer community in, 20 years, 30 years, and so on. Let's see. So the way that Butler's theory of gender performativity articulates what we understand as the gender binary, so too does the Rex symbolically articulate the future of what gender might be. Much in the way that the Indominus Rex is regarded as the future of genetic engineering, what is the Indominus of gender, and what fossils will we leave behind as we discard oppressive arrangements of gender? I'm not gonna lie, that was a really fun statement to write. I'm just gonna pat myself on the back for a second. So if we are to do away with all of the negative parts of gender as a framework, and I don't really know what those are. I didn't really have a point in saying that they're, we could say that transphobia is a negative consequence of the gender binary as it is now, right? So what does gender look like in 100 years when we maybe don't have that, right? If we were to take all of the best parts of what we know now about who we are and use that to create a whole new future or a whole new Rex, as it were, in the film, what would that feel like and what would that be like? Um, Genetic engineering for these creatures is much in the way of what we get to do with the future of how we articulate who we are as far as queerness goes. Um, and there's also some queerness to the idea that you can sort of pick apart the parts of something that you like and put it together in a way that fits you best. So I think that that's another way to sort of feel out the way that this might work, right? Um, and I just want to pause here for just a second and go back to the velociraptors. And sorry, I am going to go backwards. I hate when people do that in a PowerPoint, but we're going to do it. I didn't have a good way to add this onto that slide to like stay in sequence. But I mentioned here the fact that the velociraptors are smart. So what, pardon me, one of the basic details in the story, both in the book and in the film, are that these creatures are smart. And to me, the smarts of these creatures act much in the way that the smarts of queer people do in real life. So the dinosaurs, again, are, torn out of a timeline, or torn out of their place in a timeline and put into another part of the timeline, right? We essentially bring them back from the dead, right? And they are existing in a timeline that's not meant for them. And they have to figure out how to survive and thrive in spite of that. And that, to me, still says a lot about the way that queer people are not allowed to exist in whatever their natural space is, right? So I'm very comfortable in who I am, right? But the society that I'm in may or may not be that way. And so I have to figure out how to be almost smarter than the system that I'm in. And that's to say that the velociraptors, one of the famous parts of the film is when they take the cow, like on a big crane, into the velociraptor pit. And so they have to feed them, right? So they strap up this poor cow and they throw him into the pit, right? So these creatures essentially come to find out when the fence is turned on and when the fence is turned off. So, and this is sort of going back to the title. When we outsmart the fences that we're in, that to me is queerness. You take a creature out of what is most comfortable for it, and you impose a systematic oppression to the creature, right? Like they're not meant to live in our timeline. Or in our portion of the timeline, right? And so we put them here and we expect them to behave the way that we think that they will. So these creatures are put in cages, and essentially by the end of the film, they've outsmarted the thing that was supposed to keep them in line, right? As I've said 3 times, the dinosaurs don't stay where they're supposed to stay. And that's because they have to figure out how to survive in a system that is essentially working against them, right? And to me, that's what queer people do. We outsmart the fences that we're kept in almost on a daily basis, depending on where we are or who we are or those kinds of things. So that was the other big portion of this for me. And more to that point, because of that, again, what does the future of gender, what could that be if we were free of the things that kept us in place, right? And so this is my last slide here. This is a famous quote from the middle of the first book. So too much change is as destructive as not enough. Only at the edge of chaos can complex systems flourish. And again, this is basically a broad stroke way of using the dinosaurs and the way that they outsmart the park for the way that queer people outsmart the systems that they're put in, right? Um, so only at the edge of chaos can complex systems flourish. So if we were to go back and touch on the chaos theory, right? Um, chaos theory is not so much about things being chaotic as it is, like, it's not meant to describe that things are chaotic because they're crazy. It's chaotic because they're alive, which means that they're not predictable, right? So for as predictable as people are, as creatures are, we're also very not, depending on what you're talking about, right? Just depending on what you're talking about. So the point being made in the quote is that these creatures are like they've been brought back from the dead, but you know, they have a heartbeat, they have a brain, like they will function as though they are alive because they are. And so you can't expect them to follow a pattern, the pattern that the park imposes upon them, right? So only when we have a little bit of chaos are we able to really see our full the full potential of something, right? And I really like this quote because I'm sorry that I keep going back a slide, but it's fine. We're just going to do it. So if you noticed here, bloop, 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 this right here, the little box sketch, that is, if I remember correctly, it's called a dragon curve, or it's a fractal. And when you put fractals together, they create a dragon curve. So this right here looks pretty normal. It's lines and boxes, and it's a system. It looks pretty predictable. Sorry. You know, so I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but if you draw a line, and then you have a right angle, and then you have another one, and then you have a box, right? So this is a way to map out what the formula of chaos theory would be like in like a picture. So the system being shown here looks pretty straightforward. You have lines, and you know where they're going to go, and you know that they're going to create a square, right? Well, if you do this particular thing, this whole boxy thing, and that is to say, if you function in a system and the system does what's expected, you know, the same way that the park is meant to run a certain way, right? And then by the end of the first film, the power in the park goes out, right? So there's a kink in the system. There's a kink in these boxes, right? Not so much in the boxes, but the kink comes later on when you take this thing that's here on the first slide, or on the slide that you can see, sorry. And if you do this about 6 times, you get what looks like what was on the last slide. And that is when it becomes a dragon curve. So the picture here is a little bit blown up, so you might not be able to tell. But if you were to repeat the squared graph, you know, a million times, and it shifts each time, the same way that the lines are made up of 90-degree fractals, you tilt the fractals after each new time that they start, and that's why you get this, you know, really long thing that's no longer just a square. And finally, that is to say that these things that function in a system, they seem manageable when they start off, right? But then this thing that seems like you know where it's going to go eventually ends up looking like this. And that is to tie this back into the quote. That is, we can only survive at that precipice, right? We have predictability and non-predictability. And in the space where both of those things push up against each other is where we are able to be creative. And that creativity goes back to what gender might be like without oppressive structures that we live in. So that's that, and I'm so glad that you were all here for this. Again, if there's a takeaway from this, it's that these dinosaurs, they have to outsmart the park, right? They have to outsmart the system that they're in, and they subvert the cages that they're in, and only when they do that do they thrive, right? So the dinosaurs don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, we want to tear the park down, right? Like they have no concept of the fact that it's a system. They just know that they want to survive, and they're going to do what they have to do so that they can. And like I said, I think queer people do that. All LGBTQ plus people do that in all kinds of ways. And so if you were to read Jurassic Park as a queer text and understand that the dinosaurs behave much in the way that queerness behaves in the system that it is in, I think there's a lot to that. And hopefully some of what I said here made sense to that point. So that's my whole thing. Again, I'm so glad that you guys were all here. I hope that you have something nice to take away from that. Anything that you guys would like to say or talk about or ask about, or I know that I tripped up some there, and I've been talking for probably close to an hour. So anything that you guys would like to say or questions about all this? It's a-okay if not. I just can't see you all, so just let me know, or just come off mute and shout at me, and I'm gonna go back here and get myself out of this. All right. Well, again, I'm so glad that you guys were all here, and thank you. I'm gonna see if do you have anything else that you need to?
I'll get on there and say
Okay.
bye and stuff.
Okay. Thank you all so much. Here, let me. Yeah. Sorry. Thank you.
Hey, Will, before you get off, can I say something?
Sure.
I truly enjoyed this. You made me look at Jurassic Park much differently now.
Thank
And
you.
I appreciate how you say that life finds a way. And that's true for all identities, cultures, and backgrounds. And thank you for sharing this, because I have to go back and do a lot of rethinking about things and unlearn some things that I don't think I learned the correct way. And this has really showed me a whole different light to think about things. So thank you. And it was a job well done.
Thank you so much. I'm glad that I could do that for you. All right, give me just a second, and we're gonna stop the video and then switch back here. There we go. There we go. I know. No, I was.
There you go. Oh, there I am. Okay. I just wanted to get on here and say thank you guys for coming. If you have any questions for Will, I am putting his email in the chat right now for anyone who wants it. And Will did bring something up about Spectrum. If you want to come to Spectrum, we meet every Tuesday at 6 p.m. We are meeting on the 10th and then the 17th, but the 17th is going to be our last meeting for the semester. So, is there anything else that you want to add?
Nope.
Does anyone have any questions for me before I leave? Okay. I'm going to say this one more time. If you didn't put your 991 in the chat, please do so now. But if you already did, I hope everyone has a good night and a good weekend. So I'll see you guys later.